For the folks who are remote, we are still waiting for Tommy. Like this, you see that pink thing over there? That's like the best place to be. You can go. You can sit with us for a bit, right? Like because we have a intro thing to go through before your thing. So.
So I just go sit in the crowd.
Yeah, sure. Anywhere is good. I'll call for you. Yeah. Apologies to the people. I'm still waiting for Tommy to come up.
Hello, apologies for being late. Those elevators can get really slow sometimes.
Tell us about it, yes.
All right.
Welcome everyone. So this is the note well. It's too much stuff in there for us to summarize, but we assume that you read it and please follow the BCPs and RFCs to figure out what's in them. And generally be on your best professional behavior here, like not necessarily for this meeting, but always. But thanks for being kind and polite.
All right, so you are in IAB Open, and this is a session that the IAB has been holding for several years now. That's an open session for the community to come and hear about what the IAB is doing on various technical and architectural topics, and also talk about the status of various liaisons with other groups. And this is an open meeting that hopefully will help the community get visibility onto what the IAB is doing, but also is a great way for the IAB to collect feedback on what is what the community is interested in, and shape what we're going to do going forward. Slide. All right, here's just some information if you want to contact the IAB or get involved. You can reach IAB at IAB@IAB.org, and it has these folks on it. We also have the architecture discuss list if you want to have a place to discuss cool architectural and technical topics. And if you have questions about liaisons, you can always reach out to the liaison coordinators, and this is a subset of the IAB members who are focused on making sure liaisons work well at liaisoncoordination@IAB.org. All right, so today we have a pretty full agenda here. So we're just going to give some status updates on various topics going on in the IAB. That's what we're doing now. We're going to have a liaison update from Barry. And so what we try to do at every IAB Open is kind of highlight a different liaison relationship and just learn about what's going on there. We have 2 workshops that are coming up over the next 6 months, and we're going to get an introduction to both of those so that you can learn more about what's going to be happening in those workshops, how to get engaged, and how to participate. And then we're looking forward to an invited talk about community networks at the end, and hopefully this will be a great opportunity for us all to learn more about what's happening there. Okay. All right, so the IAB has documents that it works on. We have 2 that are quite mature that should be coming out as RFCs relatively soon. We have the privacy partitioning document, which is a technical document that we've discussed here before. That's in Auth 48, so expect it soon. And then the workshop report from the bias workshop is in the RFC editor queue now. Next slide. We are slow, yes. Thank you, Miraku. Are we going? Let me join the, just gonna join the lightweight tool. Bear with us. Okay. Here, I'm gonna kick you out. And we're gonna do this. Okay, we have 2 technical programs currently running. Whoa, hello. 2 technical programs currently running within the IAB. We have eImpact. Suresh, if you want to just give a quick update there.
Yeah, sure. So we had a meeting on Wednesday morning. It was like excellent. So we had talks about like generally wide range of topics. And the goal of this is to push for an interim meeting. So we kind of gather some topics and do an interim. So this worked out pretty well last time. So we had like an interim in February. And some of the work we identified as was discussed in the green BOF that happened yesterday. So it went pretty well. So I think that's the model we kind of want to try to follow, do some hybrid meetings once in a while, but also try to do most of these things virtually because a lot of the people are not able to attend the meetings. So works like a really good model. And us being green, I think it also helps that we're doing it mostly virtually. Yeah, thanks.
All right, and we also have the EDM program, which is going to be meeting tomorrow morning at 8 if you want to get up early and join us. We're discussing a draft there that is not formally adopted yet as an IAB document, but we've been working on in this program, discussing some principles and guidance for how to do protocol greasing in general. We have a question, Matt?
Yes, you've used 2 acronyms on that slide with no definitions, which is completely opaque to visitors.
So eImpact is environmental impact, and EDM is evolvability, deployability, and maintainability. Thank you. All right. For liaisons, we have 3 liaison coordinators, Suresh, Chin, and Miriam. We just had the office hours for that earlier, but if you have more questions, you can always reach out to them on the email. And there have been no liaison statements made by the IAB since IETF 119. Some other updates, we're running an experiment to see if people want to discuss new work with IAB and help get guidance on that. If you're interested in talking to us there, you can come by this afternoon by the registration desks. Also, just wanted to highlight that there is the IS Open meeting that's going to be happening tomorrow morning in the first meeting slot, and this is an opportunity to hear about what the independent submission stream is doing and be able to give community feedback on where you'd like to see that go and how you want to see the relationship between the IETF and the independent stream function. And that will help be good input to the IAB for future ISE selections. All right, so now next we're going to have Barry come up. Do you want to drive your own slides? Great.
Confirm. Yes, you have to confirm. You don't want to show them accidentally. So, hi, I'm Barry Leva. I am the appointed liaison to MOG, and this will tell you what MOG is, what it's all about. I've got a few slides here from MOG itself. You get to decide which ones are theirs and which ones I wrote. But MOG is the Messaging Mobile Malware Anti-Abuse Working Group, not working group in the IETF sense. It's a community organization. Originally, it was just MOG without the 3, messaging being the original M, and it was chartered to talk about messaging abuse and the mitigation and thereof, defense against it. So the 3 is silent in that name. In 2009, they asked the IETF for a liaison, and I was it. So here's a MOG slide. Tells you a little bit about MOG, that it's primarily company members, 260 members, founded in 2004. This is the 20th anniversary, therefore, and we're having great rejoicing because by the accident of us having to have 10 fingers, we think of multiples of 10 as being special. But there you go. So this is the 20th anniversary of MOG. It's worldwide, technology neutral and non-political. Worldwide being, we meet 3 times a year, twice in North America, once in Europe, and there's a Japanese branch of MOG called JPOG. And we've experimented with having, I don't know if experimented, some Indian organizations experiment with having an Indian MOG, but it never materialized. Maybe someday we'll actually have a MOG meeting in Asia, but not anytime soon. So the kinds of members that there are, it's I sort of categorize it as primarily email marketing people, email operators, email software vendors, and some standards people. And then there are a bunch of others. So cloud service providers are a big one now in there. But there's also government people and people who are used to working with government people. So we do policy stuff as well. And you can read this slide as well as I can. So these are some of the more relevant parts of it. I have a slide of my own on this, so I'm gonna skip that one. Okay, now we're back to my slides. MOG's relation to the IETF. The output of MOG, the goal is to provide a place to talk about the abuse of these systems, of messaging systems, of mobile systems, and how malware contributes to this. And the output is best practices documents. There are a bunch of those. Information sharing among the MOG members, and that's often very significant because it allows us to talk more about mitigation of abuse. And there's a lot of education and outreach for the members mostly. So a lot of this is, it's all member oriented. And technology transfer. The technology transfer is the part where it relates to the IETF. We've had a bunch of things come to the IETF that were incubated in MOG, and we bring information back into MOG that they then use in their planning of what best practices documents they write to advise the community. So MOG's been heavily involved in things like the email authentication work that we've done in the IETF, DKIM, SPF, DMARC. I personally don't like calling it email authentication, but that's the term that happens to have gelled for this. MOG's brought work into other working groups. UTA was a particularly notable one. The document that we're working on in DMARC, the core document, was originally published as an informational document that MOG had written. And there are some others that we had some, that we brought in from work that was done in MOG. So there's a good connection there. One of the things I always say about liaison relationships is that healthy liaison relationships work best when there's a lot of cross-pollination in general and people who work in both organizations. And that's very true with MOG, just as it is with a number of our other really good liaison relationships. So IETF work is important to MOG. Liaison work involves me taking information back and forth and helping people figure out how to bring work into the IETF. And now I have, you guys have a more formal program to do that now, which is great. I've been wishing for that, so thank you. I'm going to have MOG participants who've chaired IETF working groups. Some of them have stayed to do more IETF work. Some of them just chaired the one working group and then left, which is sad, but there you go. On the MOG side, some of the more relevant stuff to the IETF are the new AI committee, because AI, right? I'll just note that I attend the Network and Distributed Systems Security Symposium every year, NDSS, which is run by ISOC. And they, this year, by far, the largest number of papers submitted had to do with AI and machine learning. And then when you looked at the little bar charts that they had, the bar chart for AI went all the way across the page, and the next one only went like, you know, half an inch or something. So anyway, AI, and they're looking at three aspects of it: abuse that's facilitated by AI systems, abuse of AI systems to make them do bizarre things, and using AI to counter abuse, to detect abuse sometimes. So that's just getting started, and looks like that'll be an interesting one. Data and Identity Protection Committee does issues of authentication and authorization, password practices, advice about multi-factor authentication and that kind of thing. So there's some papers that MOG has put out talking about how you should use MFA and why it's important, and what you should and shouldn't do with passwords and that kind of stuff. The Names and Numbers Committee, where we connect a lot with ICANN, and that talks about abuse of domain names and abuse that has to do with IP addresses and that sort of stuff. The Public Policy Committee, where the people in MOG who are connected to government stuff talk about well, like for instance, what people had to do when GDPR came in. What regulations, what privacy regulations are developing in other areas, what AI regulations are starting to be talked about in various jurisdictions. So there's a lot of conversation about that. And then the technical committee has a whole bunch of subcommittees, and two of them that I wanted to call out here are the DDoS, the dynamic denial, or the distributed denial of service SIG, special interest group. That helps ISPs, hosting companies, and DDoS service providers to understand the attacks and how to prevent them and how to mitigate them. And the Internet of Things, SIG, is looking at privacy and security issues and abuse of Internet of Things devices and gateways and that sort of thing. So here's, I'm not going to go through this list. You can read it while I'm talking, but MOG has a whole bunch of best practices documents, and here are an example, here is a set of examples of some of those. Some of them are updates to older documents that, for instance, the managing port 25, we'd actually started hearing noise that, well, you published that 20 years ago or 18 years ago, whatever it was. Is it still relevant? Maybe it's not. Well, yeah, it is. You still need to close down port 25 to keep abuse down on your systems. So we updated it. And in addition to just making it seem more current, there actually turns out were a few substantive updates that made sense. So we did that. Some of them are new things that are popping up. Best practices for sending domains. That has to do with email marketers. How do you send out your marketing email to people who really want to receive it and avoid sending it to people who think it's spam? What are the best practices for avoiding annoying people with your marketing? So, and there's a link at the bottom that's where you can see all the published documents. The formal published documents of MOG are public, even though the meetings are not. And here's some work that looks like we might get started maybe come sometime soon, stuff that's being discussed, things about enterprise mobile messaging and how you safely use mobile devices in your enterprise. Some advice about open web proxies, basically don't do it. As I said, password recommendations and multi-factor authentication recommendations and that sort of stuff. Routing security, we're getting into looking at manners work and other similar things for how to improve routing security. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say about MOG, and I think I'm right on time. Anybody have any questions for me? Well, thank you then.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's a useful update. Perfect. All right. And next up, we're going to go over the workshops that are coming up. So I'll invite Mark up. Do you want to drive or do you want? Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about the AI control workshop that we've just scheduled for the IB. Next slide, yeah. So there's some interesting things happening in the world. As an example, in the EU, they had a directive passed in 2019, which talked about how people can opt out of an exception for copyright. So normally copyright is kind of an opt-in thing. You know, you have to say, I license this to you to allow somebody to use it. But for the AI purpose, this directive says basically we reverse that and you can opt out of that by reserving your rights. So next slide. And that was kind of codified in what's popularly called the AI Act, which was just passed recently, in that providers of general purpose AI models need to obtain authorization from right holders if they want to carry out text and data mining over such works. And so, next slide. That's just an example, but what's happening is, and the suspicion is other jurisdictions are going to do similar things perhaps. But what's happening is that AI crawlers, AI providers are converging on using the robots exclusion protocol or robots.txt, which is an IETF standard, as the means of doing that opt-out. And so this is an emergent practice. And so next slide. The question is that appropriate? What properties does robots.txt have as an opt-out mechanism for AI crawlers? Next slide. And so, for example, if you look at a robots.txt file, you see that it allows you to distinguish things by user agent, so by the identity of the crawler. But there's nothing here that says I want to opt out of AI altogether. If I don't know the crawler name, I can't really opt out of it. So what mechanism is there for this use case in robots.txt that is amenable to someone confidently saying I have opted out of AI scraping, for example? Next slide. Furthermore, some people have brought up, this was from some hearings that were held at the Copyright Office in the US. I almost said here in the US, whoops. Yeah, close enough for my purposes, but I'm far away usually. And authors are pointing out, and advocates of rights holders are pointing out that, this was kind of a land grab, that AI crawlers went out and spidered the internet or reused existing indexes of the internet before anyone even knew what this use case was. And so what about their rights? So how does robots.txt apply over time? Does it make assertions about things that, content that was spidered 2 years ago, for example? And that's another discussion to have. Next slide. And finally, there's a lot of content on the internet that robots.txt isn't really amenable to talking about because the actual content creator or rights holder doesn't have the ability to write to the robots.txt file. So for example, this is a recently very popular social network for some reason, LinkedIn, or more popular than it used to be. And the IETF has posted to it, but the IETF has no ability to talk about how it wants to express its rights or withhold its rights for this content because it can't write to the robots.txt file for linkedin.com. Next slide. And so we've spun up a workshop to have a discussion about this. There's a recognition that the technical issues here are there, but they're not the biggest part of the work. It's more of a discussion between rights holders and people who might want to use AI or people who spider content for AI, and of course policymakers. And so we're holding this workshop to have that discussion so we as a technical community can listen to those different parties and start to think about what the requirements are and what the problem space is. Next slide. And so it's a workshop we're holding in Washington, D.C., because we want to engage with those communities more than we want to engage with the technical community. We're doing it on a relatively fast schedule because there was a recognition that if we don't hold this soon this year, it's going to get bumped into next year by various events and holidays and so forth and so on. And we really need to have this conversation this year. And so the workshop's going to be held 19-20 September, and we've made submissions due on the 2nd of August. We're not necessarily requiring to submit a full academic paper. We just need kind of expressions of interest and positions so we can understand who wants to come to this thing. It's an in-person workshop, and we're going to hold it under Chatham House rule because we identified that a lot of the parties who come to this may have sensitivities about being quoted in public, either because they represent a government or because there are commercial considerations, either on the AI side or the rights holder side. And so there will be a workshop report, and we'll try and distill all that we hear, but we're not going to be identifying individual parties without their permission. I think that's it. Is there another one? No.
No, that's it, Mark.
That's
Thank
it.
you. Thanks.
And there's the URL at the bottom. So any questions?
Hi, Jean-François Gerald. Not going to be my case, but I'm just wondering, maybe I missed it, for the workshop participation, for those who might live abroad, are you going to have any type of support to participate?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
For those who live abroad, the US, and may want to participate, since apparently it's going to be only an in-person.
It's an in-person workshop.
So is there going to be any type of travel support or support for others?
I don't know that there's travel support, but I think that's ultimately up to the IAB.
Because that's going to limit a little bit the
hands.
participation for those who can't make it and cannot afford to go to the US and stay in Washington.
I think that if that is the case, we just encourage anyone to reach out with that case and we can
Right.
look at
Just
it.
want to clarify for
Yeah.
whoever may be considering and they might be discouraged from
Yeah,
participating.
if anyone is concerned about that, yeah, please reach out.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. So I think it's, if you're accepted to the workshop and there's an issue,
We can talk.
we can have a discussion. Yeah.
We also have, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I just want to, even if you can't travel to the workshop, please submit your submission anyway, so there can be still good input to the workshop, and then we figure out
Right.
what's the useful thing to do.
Absolutely. But part of the function here is just to collect a lot of different perspectives into one place, especially for policymakers to refer to, and that can serve that function too.
Okay, Nick?
Nick Doty, CDT. Thanks for organizing the event. I think it's an important topic. Mark, you spoke a lot about rights holders on one side and AI on the other, and I think by rights holder you meant copyright holder. Is that right?
So the EU legislation expresses it in terms of copyright. I think, in the discussions we've had in the program committee, there are a lot of related areas here in terms of other use, how granular do you want to be about your permissions about different use cases for AI. I mean, there's the general, this is training for the model. There might be other use cases that emerge in the future. We recognize it's still quite early days. So it's not a copyright workshop, but I think it's going to be the lens through that naturally a lot of the participants do look at it through.
Okay, great. I mean, I hope we will do a slightly broader lens for people who don't necessarily own large copyrighted corpora, but might care about their own data.
Oh, absolutely. I think, you know, at least for me, the focus is as an individual who uses the internet and doesn't have a huge platform, how do I have a say in this?
Great, thanks.
Alyssa Cooper, just to respond a little bit more to that. I think this is actually well reflected in the workshop call for papers now. We tried to expand it to make it clear that these other use cases that relate to individuals' own data where they might not actually hold a copyright is definitely in scope. I want to see papers on that topic.
Jonathan Hoyden, Cloudflare. One thing that I've noticed getting blocked recently is if you use Google Translate to try and translate a website, it's like, oh, no, we don't want AI scraping our website. I'm like, is that a copyright issue? I mean, I just want to be able to read your website and I don't speak your language.
Right.
So yeah, there are other lenses, is the point.
Right. And that, you know, you talk to folks over on the W3C side and they see that as a core a facility on the web that as a user, you get to decide how content is presented to you and, you know, how you can use it.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
And we look forward to your submissions and engagement.
Oh, you don't need.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay. All right. So the second workshop of the afternoon is a workshop about the next era of network management operations. There's a number of people involved, both from the IAB as well as the NMOP chairs and the Ops AD as well. So way back a long, long time ago, RFC 3535 is actually written about a workshop that was held in 2002 by the IAB about network management. At the time, there was a bunch of sort of competing forward technologies. Where do we go from here? SNMP was quite old. COPS was one. Well, should we do stuff over HTTP? Should we use XML? I mean, there was a lot of discussions. Next slide. So in this workshop came out a bunch of requirements and recommendations, sort of, you know, where do we go from here? How are we going to consolidate? What protocol should we use? What format should we use? And we queried a lot of operators at the time. So it was trying to bring together, coalesce both operators and protocol engineers to try and get some agreement on sort of, you know, where do we take, you know, managing networks today. Is anybody else in this room, were any of you present at that? I actually was. Oh, Rudiger was there, awesome. Yeah, so the people have changed. That's a clear indication, right? Only 2 of us, I think, in the audience were there, and possibly some online. I know there's other people here this week that were there too. Go ahead and go on. So one of the things that came out of that past workshop was one of the forward directions are we kind of do need to shift how configuration is especially sent around. SNMP is actually still used a lot for monitoring. I think a lot of things have shifted lately into other things that have been using web-based protocols. Prometheus is very popular and things like that. But what came out of the recommendations from 3535 was, you know, XML was in the hype at the time. So NetConf was born, pushing it over both SSH and HTTP with REST. And then Yang is the new data modeling language, which was a deeper structured language than what SNMP MIBs and COPS PIBs gave you at the time. Next. So it's been 22 years. It's time to sort of think about what's new. And so the NMOP working group has recently come up. And one of the things that the NMOP group is charged with is to look at these technologies that are in use to manage and configure everything from routers to nhosts to, you know, these days, you know, wireless light bulbs and all sorts of other things. And then figure out, you'll notice at the bottom bullet actually refers to 3535. What should we do? So next slide. So it's time to do it again, right? It's time to actually take the big picture approach. It's time to look at the full gambit and say, where are we and how do we think longer term? How do we think, what is our trajectory for trying to get? It's a very wide venue, right? Network management is used across all swaths of the entire IETF set of protocols, from managing BGP to managing web servers to managing everything. So the big picture approach is actually kind of hard. So the IAB wants to hold a workshop, another workshop about that. Next. So this is the description of the workshop. We've sort of just been putting it together. It's not entirely done. There's some TBT kind of things, but we did want to announce it this week before we make the full call for papers at some point in the future. But the three goals are: one, we want to review the output of, okay, we made recommendations in 3535. Did we follow them? Did the industry follow them? Are anybody using the results? So trying to do some historical analysis of what has happened. Some sketching some new requirements. Where do we want to go from here? What are we missing? What requirements actually did we miss? What requirements are actually still unfulfilled? And then sort of to develop a plan of action, right? If we were going to progress from here, what are we thinking? What's the modern industry thinking? Next. So there's a lot of topics, and this is still subject to a little bit of twiddling. We don't want to conflict with things like the NMRG, the Network Management Research Group, which is also thinking about long-term trends of network management and very new ideas. But really sort of in between, where we want to talk about tooling and open source and proof of concepts and interoperability and things like that, more the traditional. How do we shove data and knowledge around, especially with the size of networks growing to 10,000 plus devices? Some people wonder whether our current network management tools can actually scale to levels like that. And one of the things that we're going to do is not just, and we did this actually 22 years ago as well, we don't just want to hold a workshop. We also want to try and pull in information. So we're actually going to, there's some people that are going to go hold sort of information gathering sessions at a bunch of operator communities for two purposes. One, to gather some information and bring it to the workshop, sort of summarize it and say, look, we went out and talked to a bunch of operators. This is what they're using today. We counted the number of times that they do SSH, whatever it's going to be, right? And then two, to try and encourage them to come. 22 years ago, there was actually a little bit more operational centered folk in the IETF. There was more operators actually participating, and these days that is, it's declined a little bit. There is in certain areas in the IETF and less than others. So we want to encourage them to come. It's still like a normal IAB workshop where you expect to write a proposal or a thought paper. It can only be one page, and then come and have a discussion. Next slide. So we're still finalizing it. Some things are still TBD, but we did want to announce it. This is not going to happen until December, and the reason being is that we want to go talk to Nanog and RIPE, which doesn't happen until October and September and things like that, as well as some other things. So this is an early one. There is already an email list up for people that want to subscribe. It's called NEMOPS-interest. And we'll be sending announcements there because we want people outside the IETF to subscribe. But if you're, of course, on IETF Announce and other things, you'll see an announcement from us for the actual call for papers when it goes out. We'll send out a call for papers sometime soon, probably in the next couple of weeks to a month, and then we'll remind people much later. But because we want operator involvement, the call for papers will actually have a long running time as well. So feel free to contact them/us, since I'm on the list. The program committee has already sort of been formed. If you want to be involved at all, do subscribe to the email list. And then, of course, you'll see the call for papers coming out soon. I think that's the final slide, right? Yeah. Any questions about it? Anybody still doing network management? I guarantee you are, you just don't know it. All right. I figured we wouldn't use all 15 minutes. I think you're good.
All right, thank you, Wes. Great, so those are the two upcoming workshops that we're going to be holding. And next, we're going to move on to our invited talk on community networks from Bill Murdoch.
Thank you, Bill, for coming down and talking to us. Like, really looking forward to this. So just call out the slides if you want. If you want to go to the next one, whenever. Thanks.
So community-led solutions in indigenous communities. So I just thank you for IETF and IAB and ISOC for bringing me onto this platform. Next slide, please. There we go. So Clear Sky Connections. First off, Clear Sky is not an internet service provider. I get that request a lot from Manitoba communities. Well, can you provide internet service? No, we're not an internet service provider. Clear Sky is a not-for-profit federally incorporated corporation in Manitoba, or in Canada. We were incorporated March 31, 2017. In Manitoba, there's 63 First Nation communities. We're collectively owned by 44 of the 63. And for a community to become a part owner, it's just a matter of filling out a form, and then they become a part owner of Clear Sky. We are the mandated organization by the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, and that political process took us about 4 years to complete. So we carry the mandate to build the fiber network, and in addition to that, the education and training piece. Once the fiber is in place, how do they use it? What can they use it for to provide that education and awareness? Next slide. So who's Bill? I'm currently the executive director of Clear Sky Connections. That's what pays the bills. Everything else is pretty much volunteer. I'm the acting executive director with the Indigenous Connectivity Institute. Currently the chair of the First Mile Connectivity Consortium, where we do a lot of the policy work with working with the CRTC. Part of the IEEE mentor program, working with a group out of Nigeria. Somehow I got on the information management, First Nation information management with the city of Toronto. Also the vice chair of ISOC Manitoba chapter. Doing this, my current role, I've been working with the project for over a decade. I've been working in an IT area for over 2 decades. As for my technical certifications, you'll notice my last technical certification was Windows Server 2012, so I'm a little bit out of touch with the IT area. Why I do this work? Well, the benefits the internet can bring to a community, and more so an individual in the community. Next slide. So a community network. Community network for First Nations is a network that is owned, controlled, accessed, and possessed by the community, respecting the First Nation principles of OCAP. And part of that process is having meaningful consultation with the communities, and keeping in mind that each community is different, not only in their technical readiness, but also the size, geography, political leadership, and traditional leadership. So it's not only talking to the political leadership for the community, you have to talk to the right people in the community to get the community support to move the project forward. Next slide. So the 3 main business pieces for providing internet service to a community, you have from the customer to the ISP, their internet service provider. The next piece is the transit. So that's the connection from the major urban center to the community. And the third piece being gateway. So typically the connection in the major urban center to the global internet. So the ISP, we work with the communities, and working with the communities, we provide them 3 typical options. They can become their own internet service provider, which many communities already have a local internet service provider. So we replace the wireless backhaul with fiber backhaul. They could choose to farm it out to a third party, and in that case, we work with the third party to provide the service. Or they could choose, which a lot of the First Nation communities lean towards, is kind of a hybrid model, where it's branded as a community ISP, but in the background, there's another ISP that runs the switches and IP space billing system. But any boots on the ground is done by any work in the community, boots on the ground work is done by the local community themselves. Next slide, please. So build methods. These pictures are from a roughly an 80-kilometer fiber build in northern Manitoba. As you can see, the soil and the environment conditions. We install conduit. Conduit's essentially a plastic pipe. The reason we do that, it provides a clear path to run the fiber through, and also minimizes the future replacement costs. So once the fiber is installed, it doesn't have an infinite life. If it's hung on a pole, it has an estimated life of 20 years. If it's buried in the ground, it has an estimated life of 40 years. So if we do a direct bury, at the point it has to be replaced, well, you have to bury it again. You have to incur all those labor costs to get it in. But if you put it in conduit, all you have to do is attach the new fiber to the old fiber, pull the old fiber out, and it pulls the new fiber along with it. It minimizes your install costs. The build is expensive. We're connecting, in Manitoba, there's, like I said, 63 First Nation communities, on reserve population of about 150,000. So some community, a small community would say 200-300 people, a large community would be 5,000 people. So it's very difficult to make a business case to connect the individual community, which is why we have to rely on grant funds. So the initial grant funds cover the initial build costs, and of course the benefits having connectivity in the community, the more so the social benefits, health, education, public safety, entrepreneurship. Imagine trying to run a business, create a business, if you do not have internet access and say you don't have a computer. It's very limited how far you can go in running your business. Next slide, please. So building in remote areas. Well, there's a short build season, especially for Manitoba. We have to wait until the ground is thawed so we can bury the fiber deep enough. Typically that's June. So our build season's from June until the ground starts to frost over, which is end of October, early November. Also, some areas are not connected by all-season roads. They have seasonal roads. So we have to wait until there's 32 inches of ice before we can get the heavy machinery and heavy trucks on the ice roads to stage equipment and stage materials for later build later in when the weather gets warmer. Also, because we're building in remote areas, there's the need for other expertise to be readily available, such as a welder and a mechanic in case you have problems. If you're building in remote areas and something breaks, it's very time consuming to fly somebody up from say Winnipeg to the area to fix a mechanical problem or to weld something that may have broke during construction. Next slide. So the barriers of access. The technical barriers, access to existing infrastructure. So in Manitoba, there is a lot of existing fiber and a lot of simply getting agreements to physically access the fiber, either dark fiber or dark waves, is one of the technical barriers. Financial barriers, access to grant funds to cover the initial costs. And even when we have funds available, be eligible costs within those grant funds, which is a moving target. And depending on the funding provider, like some funding providers will say they might cover some of the operational costs or legal fees. Other funds may not cover operational costs or legal fees. Some funds may cover the hardware at the POP, but they do not cover the CPE equipment. So we can install fiber and get connectivity at the community, but we don't have funds to install the hardware at the individual homes. Legal barriers, service agreements and partnership agreements, working with other entities to be able to provide connectivity to these communities. Next slide, please. So well, this is a map of the city of Toronto, their fiber map. Two major telcos. One telco's the red, the other one's the blue. So with the funding model, with the current funding models, they look for complete solutions. They look for access to the customer and access to the gateway of the global internet. So I mentioned those three business pieces where you have ISP, transit, gateway. Well, the funding models want a complete solution. So because of the funding models, you're left with a situation where you have fiber running to a neighborhood by one telco. Another telco puts in a grant application to provide access to, say, a neighbor or neighboring neighborhood. So there's another grant agreement, another funding. So you have fiber on both sides of the same neighborhood, but two different telcos, or you may only have one telco that has fiber to your premises, and you're limited to who you can use as a service provider based on who owns the fiber. As opposed to a shared access infrastructure. So if we simply build fiber and it was community owned and everybody has access, then the customer would have a choice of who their internet service provider could be, as opposed to being limited to who owns the physical infrastructure that runs to their premises. So like a road, the internet is for everyone. Next slide, please. Why fiber? This project actually started 11 years ago-ish under the Assembly of Manitoba Chief's health portfolio. At the time, it was, how do we get more bandwidth to support electronic medical records? Because we were deploying EMRs to First Nation communities. The project, the health department separated from AMC to form FINISM, the First Nation Health and Social Secretariat of Manitoba. Under FINISM, a feasibility study was done. The only viable option was to run fiber everywhere. It was the only technology that could provide sufficient bandwidth to support EMR. So the project scope expanded from more bandwidth for EMR to connecting communities with fiber. Is there a need or a fit for LEO and other wireless technologies? Yes, it is in the plan, but we need the bandwidth for not just internet, but voice services, streaming video, digital radiography, cell service, especially with 5G cell service. So there is a fit in there for LEO and other terrestrial wireless, but we see it as a backup in case, or when the fiber gets cut, when the communication gets cut, to have the critical communication go over the wireless network. Plus with the wireless network, there's distance limitations. Plus the electronics are exposed to the environment, so they have a life anywhere from 3 to 8 years, the sweet spot being about 5 years. So there's always continuous replacement cycle for wireless equipment. As opposed to buried fiber, like I said, 40 plus years. That's estimated. I know in Quebec, they actually use 50 years as the estimated life for buried fiber. Next slide, please. FIBRE, fiber. I know there's going to be debate. Please hold your questions. So why fiber? Well, again, vast distances. Our build plan includes, uses existing, try that again. So our build plan uses existing right-of-ways. On this map, so this is a map of Manitoba. This is our fiber plan. So the blue lines, that's existing Manitoba Hydro Telecom's fiber. The yellow line is what's called bipole 3, so the fiber is installed, it's just not lit up yet. The red lines, that's our plan. So our plan is to extend the existing fiber network that exists in Manitoba to the First Nation communities for connectivity. And again, why fiber? Because the limit is theoretical. Just a note. So in the south, we have Winnipeg, they're right in the middle at the bottom end. And it's hard to see on this, where it's in the box there, there's the red lines that go east to west. So if you're driving a car, just to give you an idea of some of the scale, 12 hours on the highway, 100 kilometers an hour, nonstop, just keep going. For 12 hours, you'll end up in Nelson House. So that's the distance from Winnipeg to the red, basically the red lines that go east to west there. So we're talking huge distances. Next slide, please. So connecting communities requires the technical, financial, and legal plans. So through in partnership with Manitoba Hydro Telecom, they had the blue lines. So we did put out an RFP process. We selected Deloitte, Dentons, and Morris Hirschfield way back when to design the network, the technical, the financial, and the legal plan for the network. For connecting communities, so the short money is in the construction. So we receive money to build a network. That's the short money. The long money is with the internet service provider. So that's their reoccurring fees. That's why it's important to work with the local communities so they can become their own ISP. Next slide, please. So this is intentionally blurry. That's our technical plan. Well, it's part of our technical plan. So we do have the technical plan to connect all 63 First Nation communities in Manitoba, both the physical and the logical network design. Next slide. The financial plan, I think it's pretty straightforward. So we use a 70% subscriber model. So once the community is connected with fiber, using that 70% subscriber model in the community, we can show that the project operating as a not-for-profit is sustainable, and we can replace the fiber at a 40-year life expectancy. But the big block is the initial build costs. So we need the grant funds to do the initial build, but once it's built, it is sustainable going forward. And the First Nation communities, in short, they have to all work together. So for this to work at all, we need to leverage economies of scale. So we need to work with everybody, and everybody needs to work together. Next slide, please. The legal plan, items such as service agreements for transit or access to existing fiber or co-location agreements, community ISP, partnerships, in case there's a break fix that needs to be done, business structures, and of course revenue sharing. How do we pay for everything? Next slide, please. And this is my second last slide. So in a nutshell, the internet's for everyone. Why do I do this work? Well, for me to help all the communities or help a community is a grand task. So my philosophy is I look to help an individual in the community. I don't know who that individual is going to be, but there's going to be somebody in that community that's going to run with us, thinking that individual will then help their family, and then the family will help the community. So in partnership with, I'll try to remember the name of the company, Interactive Design. So in partnership with Interactive Design, we ran the new media program, NU media program. The new media program provides education and training, everything I need to do with working on a TV or film set. And through that, we had a partnership with, or Netflix was interested. Jambo, who's the gentleman there, you notice the Clear Sky logo on his sweater. So he did a short film, 5-minute short film. Netflix loved it. They actually gave him a grant to expand his short film to a longer format for the Netflix platform. So that's one of our big success stories. I know he's filmed it. It's in the can. It's just not on the Netflix platform yet. In the group picture at the top there, the top corner, kind of his head sticking out. That's actually my son. He got voluntold to be part of the program. And through this, he's got the acting bug now. So he's got a couple film credits. He hasn't any speaking roles yet, but he's on that path. The group at the bottom, that's the Nelson House build that we completed back in 2020. That was the groundbreaking ceremony. And next slide, please. Thank you. How was I for time?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's perfect. Thanks. I had a question for you. When you're building this network, right, so your physical conditions are like very different from what we do. So we kind of look at this here. Is there any specific set of problems that you encountered that our protocols haven't kind of helped with, like troubleshooting things or anything? Is there something you want to bring to us, like as problems? So we do have a place in IRTF that's called Gaia that kind of like could be a place for you to bring any kind of like gaps in our solutions, like for the internal protocols that could make things better for you going forward, or for another community just like you somewhere else to go forward.
Yeah, I'll try to answer your question. So like I said, my last technical certification was Server 2012, which I know the government still uses because I'm working, a friend of mine's actually working on a project to upgrade the 2012 server. So I know it's still in use, but like I said, I'm 10 years out of touch with the IT stuff. Been working more on, pushing paper and project management. Our entire network design, the longest fiber run we have is about 200 kilometers. I know I believe it's Ontario, they actually have a fiber run that's 300 kilometers, but that fiber run is for redundancy and resiliency on their network, so it's not their primary connection. So I don't know, maybe technical specs to allow being able to push the signal farther distances where there's no option for power along the whole length. From a policy side, dig once policy. So if you're going to open up the ground for anything, water, sewer, putting in new roads, replacing bridges, put in conduit. I mean, conduit's like $5 a meter. If you're spending $1,000 a meter on a gravel road, add $5 a meter for material costs to put in conduit. That'll save us, $60 or 60,000. To install conduit is roughly $60,000 a kilometer in these remote areas. So if you already have the equipment there to install it, put conduit in. Then we just have to blow the fiber through the existing conduit. Funding models. The funding models need to be more flexible because there's a lot of expenses that are not under eligible costs that we have to source those funds outside of the grant funds, through revenues or some other means. And prioritize not-for-profit organizations, because connecting these communities, there really is no business case. Like I heard a presentation earlier where all the easy problems were solved 20 years ago. Well, if there was a business case to connect these communities, the major telcos would do it already. It would have been done, but it's not done because it's expensive. And we're talking a community of 300 people to 5,000 people. It doesn't make sense for a major telco to build infrastructure there to provide service unless there's a financial incentive for them, but there isn't. So that's why we operate as a not-for-profit. And that's why we separate it out into 3 separate business pieces. So the gateway, so there's lots of gateways, internet exchange points. We just connect from there to the transit piece to the community. So the transit's a separate business piece. And then you have the internet service provider, which is, we work with the local community. In Winnipeg, there's actually an internet service provider that is one office building. A friend of mine runs space in there. There's an ISP, and the ISP is literally one office building. So all the tenants in there subscribe to that ISP. So it doesn't have to be huge. I mean, it could be very small, and it works.
Thank you.
I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Thanks, Pete.
Totally cool stuff.
Thank you.
Absolutely fabulous. 3 really quick questions. The ownership model of the fiber plant after it's built, does the not-for-profit still own it?
Yes.
Cool. What was, as far as the grants, were you mostly getting government or were you getting private and government, or a mix, how were you getting the money for this? This is expensive, I know.
Majority of the funds are the government grants.
Okay.
I know in the United States, they have the BEAD funding that they've been advertising. So I've done a little bit of work with New York State and California. So that's why I'm familiar with that. But my focus is obviously in Manitoba, Canada. So here we've had a number of grants. Way back when we had I think CTI, Connect Innovate. Under the CTI grant, it was last mile builds only. So, well, there's no transit, what are we going to connect to? So it didn't make any sense. So then they came out with new grant funds. Universal Broadband Fund is the big one now. But with the UBF, again, they're looking for that end-to-end solution where you go to the telcos to, okay, we need you to build the fiber infrastructure or the wireless infrastructure to provide service to this community. Well, you're essentially creating a monopoly for that community. I mean, the community really only has one choice because you only have one owner of the infrastructure. That's why our model is to separate it out. Clear Sky owns the transit, and then we don't care who the ISP is. That's up to the community to decide.
We fought this same battle locally where I am, and that's a great model, much better than what we came up with. The last question is really simple. Don't you guys have permafrost up in northern Manitoba, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually permafrost is actually really easy to run fiber through. It's actually like cutting butter. I mean, I said like a rule of thumb, we use 60,000 per kilometer to build. Going through permafrost, you could actually do it on probably under 40,000 a kilometer, because you don't have the rocks, the tree roots, and the other obstacles that you encounter with, working more in the south. So it's actually really easy going. You could do 10 kilometers a day easy, as opposed to 3 to 5 in the environment that I showed the pictures of. And you don't have to blast rocks. I mean, blasting rocks is very expensive. So they're very difficult. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Milka Levin. Thank you for doing this work. That's really important. The one thing I'm wondering about is like you have this model where the community runs their own ISP. Isn't this a big challenge because you need to train the people with the technical expertise? Are you involved in that as well?
The question's a little bit more complicated, but the simple answer is yes, we're involved with that. Okay. So the 3 business models we offer to the communities, they become their own ISP. Some communities already have a local ISP, so we're just replacing the wireless backhaul with fiber. They could choose to farm it out to a third party. So whoever that third party is, we work with them. Or they could choose like a hybrid model or a white label model where it's branded as a community ISP, but in the background, somebody else runs it. So we help with that negotiation process. And in there, we build in that. So if they choose the hybrid model, which a lot of communities lean towards, it's built into the agreements that when the community has the technical expertise to run it on their own, they can then take over that ISP process, or that ISP company. Yeah. And I know its focuses on internet, but we're talking the transit. So internet's one service, cell phone, voice, television, computer radiography. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So the transit has multiple uses.
Yeah, maybe I'm not sure if you can answer that question, but to go one step further, is there also a barrier by these communities to maybe use the internet?
There's communities that have basically been reliant on dial-up. Today, there's essentially dial-up internet. And the map going from north to south, there's a community called Gillam. So the fiber runs up to Gillam, and then from Gillam, it's a wireless signal that shoots south to reach the communities. So, but that's a 1 gig wireless link. So by the time it gets to the last community, it's actually worse than dial-up because all the bandwidth gets chewed up by the communities that it hits first. So there's definitely an education and awareness piece that's built into what we do. So Clear Sky carries the mandate to do the fiber build, but part of that is the education and training and the awareness. And one of the groups I work with is the Indigenous Connectivity Institute, the ICI. So through the ICI, we're just starting up to build Indigenous connectivity workshops to provide that basic level, the high level introductory awareness and training to communities as what's possible. I mean, we're basically a volunteer organization under the ICI. We look for technical trainers. They're looking to volunteer their time to provide their expertise and knowledge transfer to First Nation communities. So actually our next one is September.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Hi, Sean Turner. Really cool work. Thanks. Former ISOC board member. It's good to see the chapters knocking it out. Hey, so just a quick question. I really appreciated the scale and the picture of the map because I'm from a country that's a little smaller, it's a little south. I'm just curious, what's the total distance of fiber that you think you're going to end up dropping?
3,000 kilometers, roughly, give or take. I knew that question would come up. I meant to look it up before I
But at
gave this
3,000,
talk.
it's still pretty, it's a whole lot.
Yeah, we started this project about, like I said, about 11 years ago. And as time goes by, it gets more expensive to do. Like, Shemata, can you bring up the map? The slide with the map on it. Okay, right there. So in the top corner there, you'll see the Fox Lake. And then there's that red line that goes to Shamattawa. So in my mind, when we do funding applications, Shamattawa in my mind is the highest need. And that's going to be the most difficult build because that's a seasonal road. So that road is not all season. It's roughly 190 kilometers or about 118 miles, I think, of winter road to connect the community. That's relatively small. When we first did the submission 10 years ago, roughly, for the funding, that build would have cost about $7 million. I refreshed the numbers about 2 years ago. That same exact build now costs about $17 million. So it gets, as time goes by, it gets more expensive.
Cool. Keep up the good work, man.
Thank you.
Matt Mathis, awesome work. I have a question about the other map, I think it was page 7. Page 9, that map. I noticed a lack of purple. Is that a plotting artifact or is that real? And what I'm curious about is if you know what the mechanism is by which the ISPs signal each other, because that level of collusion is usually not legal. It's certainly not legal in the US. And there's evidence that the maps in the US look like this too.
Mm-hmm.
How are they signaling?
How do the ISPs talk to each other? Is that what you mean? Oh, that's permits. So they put in a funding application. There's 4 sets of engineering drawing that needs to be complete before so the first set is how do you get from point A to point B? You use that set of drawings to do your initial estimates. Then once you have somewhat of a funding approval done, the next set of drawings, that's a little bit more detailed. That's what gets submitted to the city or the province for permits. So then the city or province approves the permits for where you can build fiber to. Oh, there's existing fiber there. You can't build fiber there. You got to go the other side of the street or whatever. And then the next set of drawings, the more detailed work, that's what the construction crew uses to actually build by. And then the last set of drawings are your as-builts, which are the most important because sometimes you have to deviate from the path.
So the second set of drawings includes implicit communications through the approval agencies.
Yes. And I use the City of Toronto as example. This information was pulled from a request for comment submission done to the CRTC through their RFC process. I know it's different from this RFC process. So I pulled this from one of the submissions just to illustrate that because of the funding models, these are 2 major telcos. I don't remember. Anyway, the red is one telco, the blue is another telco. So 2 major telcos doing fiber builds in the city, and the fibers, they don't connect to each other. They probably talk to each other at the internet exchange point, but I'm just guessing at that point. Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Ali Rezaki. Thanks very much for your presentation. Really appreciate you being here. My question is, are you tracking the impact of this connectivity you're building on services like health, education, other government and private services?
I would love to have the funds to do that. That would be, that is an initiative. Actually, the University of Brandon is doing some work on that. Mm-hmm. And through our current submission for funding to do a fiber build, it's been conditionally approved. I can't say which community it is yet because the government hasn't announced it yet. But through their requirements is the benefit impacts to the community. Uh-huh. But under the eligible funding, there's no line item for that. So they want to know the benefits, but they're not willing to pay for it. Okay. And so we have to access other funds to do that benefits analysis. Mm-hmm. That the government says is a requirement.
Okay. And in your proposals for the grants, what type of methods do you propose or indicators to measure that or assess that impact, or have you done?
Yeah, I don't have any specifics. Everything is pretty much anecdotal. This project started with the health, under the health portfolio to have more bandwidth for EMR. So at that time when I was working in health roughly 10 years ago, medical transportation. So that's to get, because the First Nations have health centers. They have fractional doctors. So they'll have a visiting doctor once a week, once a month. There's one community that's large enough that has a hospital. So if somebody needs to see a doctor or they have some medical emergency, they have to be transported out of the community to the nearest hospital. That's under MedTrans. When I was working in health at the time, it was $110 million a year for MedTrans. One of the chiefs of the community said if they had connectivity, we could probably save 80% of our MedTrans expenses. But let's say 80% is not realistic. Let's say 10% is a realistic number. So $110 million a year at that time, well, that's $10 million a year. Well, we could take $10 million a year in perpetuity, leverage it, and that would pay for the whole network for Manitoba. That would be, I mean, we'd be done. I wouldn't be here talking to you saying, this is what we need to do. I would be saying, this is what we did. So we're still working on that. And I'm sure it's more than $110 million a year in Manitoba for MedTrans. Because at that time it was $20,000 a flight to get somebody out.
Sure. Thanks very much.
Other benefits, to expand on that, I guess. The schools in First Nations, in Manitoba, you need 31 high school credits to graduate. So the core catalog is 31 high school credits in Manitoba. That's it. The high school I went to had a catalog of 110 credits. So I could take something like grade 12 physics. Well, grade 12 physics is not offered in First Nation because it's not part of the core. To be hired by Manitoba Hydro Telecom, you have to have grade 12 physics. To get into some university programs, you have to have, you know, like grade 12 physics, chemistry, bio. So as you have people that come out of the community to go to higher education, well, they're already behind their peers because now they have to go back to high school to take these other courses to get into university.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, I think that is the end of our queue and the end of our main agenda here. So thank you again, Bill. I think this was really insightful and it's fascinating to hear all the different things that you're doing. And this is really great work and really helpful perspective for all of us who are working on all our various niches of the internet. And this is so much of the core critical work of actually making it useful to people. So thank you for doing the work.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing with us. All right. With that, that's the end of our agenda. Is there any other questions or things that people want to bring up broadly? Feel free to come up to the mic now or get in queue. Otherwise, we will see you next time. All right. Thank you. Is that yours? Ah.